In a recent benchmark study of procurement priorities, 52% of executives told us that they need to improve talent development and capability building, while 75% said they need to increase their investment in talent in 2021. Talent is a big topic these days, and it should be, because as procurement continues to evolve into a more strategic function, many executives are considering the mix of skills and capabilities that their teams need to have to reach a higher level of performance. Leaders like you are saying, hey, I need to find people that can have deeper discussions about categories with stakeholders and understand their business outcomes and come up with the best supply strategies to achieve those outcomes. Or I need people who can implement digital solutions to minimize operational and transactional work, because that'll free up capacity for us to focus on more strategic activities. There's an undercurrent to these statements of new people with new skills when you listen. But we see great people coming into procurement and coming onto the teams, and the question to ask is, are we really using those people to solve the biggest strategic problems for the business? And before we add new people, we should ask ourselves, are we realizing the full potential of the current team? Today, we're going to introduce an idea that will help you tap into your team's potential to improve the impact of procurement in your business. That idea is called design thinking, and we hope you'll come away from this session today with an understanding of 3 key concepts. The first is that design thinking is a method of creatively solving strategic business problems for stakeholders. The second is that the successful use of design thinking really requires a vision and deliberate efforts to bring the approach to life. And the third concept is that the benefits of design thinking, if you do it right, will be evident in the impact procurement is making in the business for the stakeholders and the end users. And that's why we're excited to be here with you today to share more about design thinking for procurement. And because we want to get it right, we've listed an expert to help us explain this idea. And I will now ask Hervé to introduce himself.
Thank you, Greg. Very big pleasure for me to be with all of you today. My name is Hervé. I'm a professor at EIPM, a school dedicated to procurement. I've joined 10 years ago EIPM to study how innovation is taking place across companies. I've established the Value Creation Observatory, a think tank dedicated to that topic. My PhD was on the history of inventors and how their skills have been evolving over time. It's going to have some importance in our presentation today. Recently, I released a book titled Fifth Generation Purchasing, which fits nicely with the idea of procurement reborn. Greg, back to you. Tell us a little bit more about you.
Thanks, Hervé. My name is Greg Anderson. For the last 20 years, I've helped clients improve their sourcing, procurement, and supply chain outcomes through the application of technology and services. These days, I lead North American sales for WNS Denali. And outcome-driven companies partner with WNS Denali to operationalize their procurement function and improve financial performance and efficiency. We work with many leading organizations providing advisory services, managed services, and digital tools and services to help our clients build stronger procurement ecosystems and make a bigger impact on business outcomes. So I'm excited to get started. I'm going to hand it over to Hervé to lead us off and really go into a history of how this idea of design thinking came about.
Thank you, Greg. Well, maybe we go back into time. It could be interesting to just a few words about why design thinking. I mean, really today, if we look at the world of procurement, it's impossible, to specify everything we need right first time. We've got complex supply chains, we've got new technology, digital transformation coming in. And we have, more and more external partners that are becoming a critical source of expertise in terms of gaining access to innovation. And we need to work at different pace to win in our market and get some success. So that's really, the kind of situation we face today that asks us to go and to look at the key principle behind design thinking, a fantastic way to bring innovation into corporations. Let's now look a bit into the past. Talking about design thinking today, I thought it would be really interesting to look back into history. I would like to say a few words about someone very special, Joshua Wedgwood. He is the British 18th century master potter. For me, he was the Steve Jobs of his time, and he perfectly mastered all the design thinking principles. Let's look at them. Even so, he was working in the Midlands. He was spending a lot of time across the market in London. He was listening to the discussion amongst the people that were doing their shopping. This is how he was gaining inspiration to create some of the most refined pieces that his factory was producing. He was listening to his client, and this brought great success to him. Let me give you further example of this. In London, he became friends with representatives of the new wealthy class. And these people were, for instance, fascinated with the recent discoveries of Pompeii and Herculaneum. This inspired him, what you see here, the black basalt vase, which was based on scenes from the antiquity. Now, that's from the user side. But what about the experimentation? Well, he was one of the first person who established a true R&D laboratory. This was in his kitchen. In the evening, every evening, together with his wife, he was on a quest to find the most beautiful colors for his product. He was using his oven in his kitchen, and he had notebooks where he was, taking all the information related to the recipes he was using to come up with all these colors. And you can see some of the outcomes that are still in the company museum. By avoiding to disrupt the production process and using his kitchen, this is how he created one of the first R&D lab that existed. Finally, he was also a marketing genius of his own time. What you see here is one piece of the queenware pottery. This was a tea set that was presented at the palace in 1765. And Wedgwood saw the opportunity of showcasing the full royal order in front of the public of London. So he rented a place on Greek Street in London as a showroom, and anyone could see everything the Queen was going to get. And a few years after, he did exactly the same with the pottery he prepared for the Empress of Russia, Catherine. Back to you, Greg.
That's a great story, Hervé. And I don't know if you know this, but I'm a ceramic engineer by degree. And I want to thank you for making a potter the hero of your story. I can tell you that doesn't happen very often. So maybe Harry Potter, but not an actual clay potter. So let's see how this story is all connected to procurement, how design thinking is connected to procurement. Now, when you look at procurement and where you sit in the business, you're in a really unique place because you're a conduit between the organization and those internal end users and stakeholders and the external supply partners, right, who provide goods and services. And that position provides you with an ideal environment to evolve into a more forward-thinking and innovative function. Like Joshua Wedgwood, you should listen to your business stakeholders and users with empathy and truly understand their needs. You have to put yourself in their shoes. And when doing so, you need to be an active listener and really listen to their needs, not jump to conclusions, really ask a lot of questions, ask why things are the way they are, and really get a good understanding and not just come to the answer, right? And that's a hard habit to break, because I think as people and professionals, we really love to solve problems quickly and move on to the next thing. And this requires some patience to really understand what the end user is going through. It requires that patience, but it really will help you in designing the right solution for your end users, because you're involving them throughout the entire process, iterating and refining potential solutions. If you think about it, end users are much more likely to buy into a solution if they participate in the design of that solution, rather than having something forced upon them, right? So finally, when you look at it in your role in procurement, you have to look to the broader ecosystem and connect the dots. And by that, we mean bring in suppliers to participate in the process. Work alongside your internal team and contribute their innovation to the solution. Now, this is a different approach than you probably take today, and it requires experimentation. And you may and you should consider several solutions before finding the best one. That's okay. And Hervé is going to talk about that, why that's okay and how that's done. Because ultimately, you want to come up with a solution that solves the strategic problem for your stakeholders. And it's a different way to get there. And that really brings me to our second key point today. Design thinking as a means to creatively solve strategic problems for the business requires a vision and deliberate efforts to bring this approach to life. You have to create the organizational capacity, the mandate, give people time, and you have to foster the right environment, skills training, experimentation, reinforcing mechanisms to promote effective design thinking. It is not a strategy. It's a different way of working that generates breakthrough innovation. And now, Hervé is going to take you through the 5-step process of design thinking.
Thank you, Greg. That was a fantastic summary of all the advantage and benefit of going through this. So let me go back to some of the steps here. So the first one is really to be able to empathize with the stakeholders and the users. And you just said it, Greg. This is all about, putting yourself into the shoes of the users, the stakeholders. And why? Why do we do that? Well, simply because, yes, we understand that big why. Why these types of requirements are important, why these types of problems need to be solved. This is absolutely essential in order to create a sense of priority in what matters when we go out and look for the best solution. And also, when we have this sympathy with users, stakeholders, we create a relationship where they feel at ease with talking about problems and pain points. And that's absolutely essential. What we want from them is stories where they felt, what we're buying, what we're getting access to has not been delivering according to expectation, or has been creating for them problem, or something they would really want to get rid of. So we need to have this empathy so they feel at ease to express all the pain points, the difficulties, the frustrations they have with whatever we're going to have to get access to. So that's what we're going to use. If we ask simply for the needs, we'll have a list of needs, and we might get a good product for that. But if we ask for the problems, if we ask for the pain points, This really helps us to get insights that can allow us to bring something that makes a big difference. Then, what's absolutely essential is not to satisfy oneself with a single solution. We need to be like someone who wants to have a beautiful garden. Greg, if you're gardening, if you want to have a beautiful tulip, they are blooming these days in France. Are you going to put one seed in the ground? No. You're going to put a number of seeds in the ground, put a little bit of water on all of these, and then when you see which ones are going to be the best, you are going to give your attention to them. So that's exactly what we do with design thinking. We can be asking our engineers, our suppliers to come up with multiple prototypes, multiple ideas on how they can solve our most important problems, how they can help us solve our most important problems. And then we've got all this range of ideas, prototypes, way to do things. And then we need to bring back the user to look at them, to react to them. And the point is not to have a prototype and spend our days, selling the idea behind it. It's just to play with it, feel it, sense it, react to it, and we should observe. We should observe the reactions, so then we can, look at what's the next iteration. What are we going to keep out of that? What are we going to revisit in the next stage in order to come to something absolutely outstanding? And we might be looping, once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. The more there's uncertainty, complexity, the more that we will be doing these loops.
Awesome.
Now we need to relate that, and I started to do this to the world of procurement. And I think it's important to think about what's traditional purchasing. We create this kind of independence. So we tell the users, don't communicate to the supplier. We tell to the supplier, any information needs to be controlled and passed to us. But we never create a situation where they can have some exchange with the user, they can demonstrate empathy and get them to express their problems. So how can we evolve our process to, bring some of this? We very often, in terms of needs, have a long list of requirements, and we pass that to the supplier. Why don't we give them some user stories, reactions of, some of the stakeholders, some of the executives, some of the people across the organization who say what they've liked and disliked about what they've used in the past, and express the pain point. What are the biggest problems that, we've experienced in the past with it? And from this, instead of expecting from each supplier one solution described in a proposal that they're going to have 2 months to develop, why don't we ask them 3 weeks so they can bring back 5 ways of solving our problem? 5 different prototypes. And at the end, if you're consulting quite a few suppliers, you'll get different possibilities proposed by each of them. And this is going to help you refine your expectations and channel for the next iteration what you will be wanting from them. So instead of creating a very long process and a single decision at the end, we can loop multiple times, revisiting, precising, channeling, getting more views, what could be done, different of these. And that can be done, on a very speedy mode. We can be an agile advisor supporting a marketing and sales team, with a number of services. And within 8 weeks, we can iterate twice in order to, consult the market on what would be a best solution. Or maybe we've built a collaboration with some key suppliers, and together we have this joint exploration of what are the problems, what are the multiple options we could use to deliver the best solutions to a problem. Or maybe we're really exploring in new territories what could be the capabilities outside that can help us make a difference? And then we've got all these iteration over time to try to find what would be the best way, to create some of these uncut diamonds that we could help to shape and bring value for the business.
Thank you. A very different approach, but ultimately one that results in a better solution, I think, right? And that brings us really to our third kind of key theme we want you to take away today, is that the benefits of design thinking will be evident in the impact procurement is making for business stakeholders and the end users. And what do I mean by that? I always like to say, how do you know something's working, right? What do you see and feel, right? First, you'll be recognized for solving the strategic problems of the business, right? Second, you'll find that you have stronger relationships and better alignment with the stakeholders and end users in the business whose problems you're helping to solve. And third, there'll naturally be greater recognition of procurement's contributions. So as we've mentioned a couple times in here, I'm going to say it again, though, it's not about creating strategies. It's about mobilizing the procurement ecosystem, the people internally, the stakeholders you serve, your team, as well as the external supply partners to solve problems creatively for the stakeholders. And the day that decision makers are fully conscious that you help them solve critical issues, no one's going to ask procurement to justify their existence and use tons of metrics to show what value they're bringing to the business. The happy stakeholders will communicate themselves about all the good things that procurement is doing. That's how you know it's working. And so to make it real for you, right? So far it's been somewhat theoretical. We had the example of Joshua Wedgwood, but now we're going to make it real with some stories. So Hervé and I are going to share a few stories of successful design thinking, and I'm going to have him start off with a couple from his experience. Hervé?
Yeah, this was one of the person I was coaching in one of our program, and that person was in charge of the HR category, and there was a big challenge at that time in the company about the volume of recruitment. They were finding it really difficult to get more and more candidates for all the jobs and all the positions that were open in the company. And it was very interesting. She came to me and said, Hervé, I want to do all this strategic portfolio analysis on the recruitment category. And I said, no, I don't think so. You need to do something slightly different. You need to look at the whole process, the whole journey a candidate who wants to get a job in your company is going to go through. So she said, okay, I'm going to give it a go. And she went, to some people that were recently recruited. She mapped the whole process. They showed her all the things that, they had to do through the different steps, how many times they had to go through an awful system in order to input all of their information and all the things that were going wrong into the process. And when this was finished, she had a full list of, problems that were clogging their recruitment channel. And she had plenty of ideas on how she could leverage other suppliers in order to bring more candidates into the process by, creating games, competitions for people to do programming and joining into this and demonstrating the brand of the company in a totally different way. And this was a way to build a plan that wasn't just about, increasing the ability to recruit at the level of the recruitment agencies, but really considering the full journey. And they went into prototyping some of these new ways of, bringing attention to this company in the recruitment process and implementing some of these solutions. Another example that I like to take is coming from a company in the field of the electricity business. And that company had started to deploy smart meters. So they were getting all of this data from a lot of different customers. And the big question is, how can you get this data to speak? How can you get this data to, deliver a service to the user in the end? And that was really difficult for them. Electric business is not, data science. So they didn't know really how much they could get out of it. And there was a sort of a battle inside the company. Some people say, well, why don't we go to this very big famous company who has 600,000 employees across the world and ask them? And others said, no, only a startup can deliver, this type of things. So there was a big unknown about who would be the best place on the market. So instead of, going to the market and doing a traditional consultation, they announced on a very large scale that they would be putting some of this data available from a certain date on a website. Then anyone was able to come up and try to create a prototype within 2-3 weeks of how they could get the data to speak. And then they would pick 3 companies, give them more data, and that's what happened. And one of them won. It was nor the startup nor the huge company. It was like a mid-sized organization. And they've built a joint venture with this organization. And all that was led by procurement. So that's another example how you bring here the spirit of experimentation, of competition, to really solve one of the key problems of the business. Do you have a story?
I do have a story. So in this case, the situation, this was one of our clients, a leading social media company, and we're supporting, and we're at that time and still are, their procurement operations for the build out of their technical infrastructure to sustain the growth of their business. So in this situation, we're a provider, a supplier to them. It's a very high growth, rapid growth environment, and a highly decentralized team building out this infrastructure. And the end users are a very technical group of stakeholders with demanding requirements. And the situation was that procurement just wasn't working effectively. And the end users were frustrated because they were wasting time on procurement, right? They couldn't be bothered with purchase orders or contracts, for goodness sakes. They've got infrastructure to build. And in procurement, felt the users were causing increased costs and maybe some unnecessary risks for the business as well by not using purchase orders and contracts and things of that nature. So there was this belief, this underlying belief that the answer to the problem is we have to replace our existing procure-to-pay technology with a new solution, and that's gonna solve these issues for the end users. So we entered into a design thinking exercise with the client, and we did a few things. So we went in and job shadowed the end users to sort of understand their needs and really work from a position of empathy for them to understand what are the demands on them day to day, right? And why do they need procurement to be an enabler and not a blocker in the process? Second thing we did was interviewed focus groups of more end users and really practiced the active listening to understand and ask why this is a problem. And then conducted a joint process mapping exercise with the end users, focusing on improving the user experience in the process, while still trying to drive the compliance and everything that procurement needed, but really trying to improve this user experience to make it something they want to use. And it was ironic because they realized they didn't really need a new technical solution. The one they had was going to be just fine, but they needed a different kind of service. And that service provided a better user experience. So what we did with them was design a white glove service model to address some of their biggest pain points. And we implemented a streamlined, automated procurement process designed to drive compliance, minimize risk, yet generate the value for the end users that they were seeking. And I always like to look at what were the results of that process to see, did it really work, right? And happy to say that we saw a 600% increase in the use of purchase orders right? So the compliance and the use of purchase orders was one of the objectives, and that went up. 97% customer satisfaction rating. So they were happy with the new process. They saw the benefits of it. They saw it being more streamlined. And that streamlining was evident in the fact that they realized a 30% efficiency improvement in the procurement operations as a result of that. So this was truly something where if we'd have done the old-fashioned thing, we probably would have jumped to a technical solution and replaced it and been right back at square one, successful operation, dead patient. But no, we really looked at it and said, is it really a technical problem or is it a service problem? So we helped create this new model with them. So that was a really great example of design thinking and practice that really paid off for one of our clients. So Hervé, I'll ask you to jump in here with me too, and because you are the expert, and I want to make sure our audience is getting the benefit of having the expert here and not just me talking. But what we put together here is some questions for procurement leaders to ponder as they consider implementing design thinking for their organization. And I think everybody out there has people that are capable of implementing design thinking. It's not that complex a concept. It's just different. It's a different approach. But as leaders, really, you need to ask yourself, are we giving our people the mandate and the time they need to do it? And we know we train people on procurement and best practices in procurement, but are we training them on different perspectives like innovation and entrepreneurship so that they're thinking, right? So there needs to be, I think, a better blend of training, all right, to take these new approaches. Traditional procurement as well as some of the entrepreneurial thinking. So, when we look at questions you should ask yourself, right? Are you taking 5 to 10% of your people and pulling them out of the day-to-day and the projects they're working on to say, hey, let's have you go work on these exploratory projects because this is a really strategic problem, a critical problem we need to solve for the business, and we want to take a different approach. And we've maybe been having trouble doing it the old-fashioned way. So let's get in there with empathy and work with the end users. How many have a team that can coach these people and guide them and dare them to do things differently, right? People don't like to fail. And we're not saying you have to fail here. We're saying experiment. Come up with different approaches. Come up with some of these prototypes that Hervé talked about. And really, look for the best solution coming out of that. Evaluate a few different things. Do things differently. And then the other question to ask is when somebody does something and they dare to do something differently and they have a great result, are you celebrating that? Are you making sure people are aware of that? Because that'll spread, right? And so implementing design thinking can be done. I promise you. Hervé said, yes, this is done. He's seen it happen many places, right?
Yeah, no, we've been, I've been part of the Peter Krajic award process every year where we have a full day where we interview some, the companies that are competing into the award. And we've seen that being implemented in some companies who are, really taking the time every year to identify what are the projects of the business where they can help make a difference. And then they take people out of the day-to-day. They take people out of, running this consultation, this selection of supplier, and they say, hey, listen, let me take an example for a pharmaceutical company that was moving into producing drugs through biology instead of through chemical process. They put one person in charge of supporting the business, creating the strategy for the next, 10 years in terms of making this happen. And that person was out, of delivering any short-term savings, but supporting the business with make or buy, looking at how to bring the right type of footprint in Asia, in Europe, and so on. And also, you might be taking someone out of a job for 2 weeks to go and help another team because that person has been working in a certain company environment and they can bring and make a difference. And we've seen that in some of these corporations. There's a systematic process of looking at how can we best support each business line, where can we work with them on solving strategic problems and allocate some people, coach them, create the confidence it's possible, and then, you know, not just sharing the classic stories, but letting everyone knows how we've been bringing a supplier for that problem in 8 weeks, or how we've been able to create a different way of gaining access to solutions from outside.
That's great. Thank you, Hervé, very much for that. So I want to start to recap here a bit, and I want to finish by talking about how to get started, right? So first, shift your mindset. We keep talking about empathy. That is so critical to design thinking. That's the key thing I've learned as I've explored this approach and you know, find out what works. It's really, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the end users and understand their experience to help them arrive at the best solution. Second, apply soft skills, right? There's active listening and empathy, as we've mentioned, right? But then you bring your knowledge of the procurement ecosystem, especially what suppliers can we bring to bear against this problem? Who has some innovative solutions that we can apply and help make that change happen? Make sure your people have the training that they need to release their potential, right? Encourage them to experiment and embrace a prototyping mindset. You have to dare to be different if you want to make a change. And then lastly, be empathetic and be curious and open your mind to innovation and don't be judgmental. Things can go sideways when you're trying to do this the first time, right? It doesn't always work out. You have to keep at it and put the time and effort into it and the patience to really arrive at a better approach through design thinking. So,
and Greg, if I can say something, you know, what's important is to, you know, get the journey started, but also commit to it. Because when you announce that, you've got 2/3 of the people who say, oh, that looks like very different from what I'm doing. But you've got 1/3 of your people who say, oh, that really sounds what I want to do. I've been dreaming of doing. And for these people, it's absolutely essential. You create a window of opportunity. They have they start to think different in a different way about their job. It's really important to make it happen. So making sure that over 2-3 years, you keep creating these events, you keep, you know, communicating on, you know, the stories, how this made a difference, capture the learning, and share across the whole networks. We need to work as teams, not just as a bunch of mercenaries, you know, busy working on their projects. And that is a fantastic impact on the productivity and on the creativity of everyone that you can implement.
I don't think I can add a word to what you just said. So that's a fantastic way to close things out, Hervé. Really appreciate having you here today as the expert. And, you know, we mentioned some bonus material that we're going to provide when we promoted this session. And I want to let everybody know that we have a design thinking handbook ready to share with all the attendees after this session. So make sure you get a copy of that and download that. And next, we're going to pass it over to our friends at SIG to start the live Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
I don't know if you know, but at the last summit, yours was the most highly ranked session that we had at the entire summit. And I think you might have done that again. So congratulations. And I did see the link to the design thinking going up. So folks, in your chat, there is a link to download the book about design thinking or their workbook on it. And I was hoping that, yeah, it's right there from Ashley. We will also share that link in the chat later on for everybody as well. So a couple questions have come in. First off, what the heck is a ceramic engineer?
Do you really want me to answer that?
Yeah, because you said it and people want to know, is that a real thing?
It is a real thing. It's basically material science and engineering, but it's focused on glass and ceramics and things that fall into that family. So, it's very high tech. That's what the computers that we're running right now are running on. The chips are made of Silicon Valley, right? So it's a real thing. And yeah, I made automotive glass and light bulbs and all sorts of that stuff early in my career before I got into the supply chain and procurement space.
All right, you're like this weird onion. Every time I talk to you, there's another layer that comes off and there's something else that I didn't know about you.
So much more than just a pretty face is what I like to tell people.
Well, and all right, so the other comment, completely off topic, is has anyone ever told you you look like Andy Cohen?
About 100 times, yes.
Okay, so to the folks who put that in and sent it to me, he knows that, but thank you. So let's get to the questions about the session. The first one is, how do you convince the stakeholders or end users to participate in the design thinking process? And I think that's a really good one, you guys, because not everyone knows what it is. And so it sounds, a little out there.
I'll ask my esteemed colleague to take that, and then I'll fill in any additional, if there's any.
Okay.
Yeah, with great pleasure. I think, in a very simple way, if you go to your stakeholders and you tell them, we can do it faster, and we're able to come up with more solutions than we used to have from supplier. The only thing we ask you is to work close to us for this shorter amount of time as a team, so we go through this process together. It's really unlikely they'll look at you and say, wrong idea. Of course, you don't do that on, the outsourcing of a lot of activities to a team where there's transfer of HR. You need to pick a case to start with where there is novelty and there's not like a huge amount of risk associated to it of that nature, but where there is innovation that can come in. And after a while, as you progress, stories will spread and you'll be able to become more sophisticated and do it in different ways.
That is great. Anything to add, Greg?
I think so. I think two things come to mind. What's in it for them, right? So you need to be able to articulate that. Why it's what's the outcome going to be? Why is it going to be better? And then I think maybe some advice for where to start is find the stakeholder. Find a coalition of the willing, right? Somebody that's willing to try this, right? You don't want to start with the toughest nut to crack. You want to start with people that are like open to new ideas. Okay, yeah, we're really trying to solve this problem. We're open to taking this new approach.
Okay. And this, oh, it's popping, hold on. I have to scroll back up. I just got lost it. But it says, how can I implement this change with so many end users around the globe? Do I need to have regional strategies? I find it difficult with my category.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And one of the beauty of this is you should escalate to get a global champion. So for instance, in one of the case that I was describing, this was about going out to gain access to a software that was helping to measure the performance of people in a totally different way, really different ways of gaining access to feedback. So of course you could be, facing HR people from every single country across the world. So they went to the users, they recorded, got their stories, collected the pain point, all the different types of people involved in the process, but they got the head of HR for the whole company, to be directly involved in the process. It was shorter, it was strategically important to change for the staff how performance measurement was done. So that got rid of, this kind of sometime in some indirect categories, this huge democratic process where you can't find the best equation, because it's really allowing to involve both users through this process, but also key decision makers because it's shorter.
I like that. I like that. So are there lessons learned that we can consider when trying design thinking? Maybe start with some failures or things that don't go well that you need to guard against, maybe?
I'd say one, big one is just jumping too quickly to the answer. I mentioned this in the presentation, Dawn, and I think if you're we just as humans and certainly as fast moving as things are today, just want to kind of solve the problem and move on to the next thing, given that opportunity. And I think if you really want to solve it and really take this design thinking seriously, you need to not jump to the answer. You need to sort of open your mind and consider other opportunities and other approaches, and not move too quickly. I think that's the biggest lesson learned is, oh, we know the answer to this. We're just going to buy that tech, or we're going to do this differently, and it's fixed. You have to give this time.
Is that where the active listening comes in? Because I think so often we're not listening. We're trying to get the answer out. And you talked a lot about the need for active listening and empathetic, and put yourself in their shoes. And that's difficult when you think you have the answer.
Yeah, there's a saying, listen with an intent to understand, don't listen with an intent to respond. And I think that's the biggest failure people have when they're listening. They're just trying to come up with what their answer is because they're trying to be smart. Just ask why. Keep asking, why is that a problem? What's the result of that? What if we fixed it? How would things be different? Just try to understand more. And it's really hard to do that. But listen with an intent to understand, not respond.
Okay, I was listening to try and understand, not respond. So, so that gives me the right to have a pregnant pause right there. This question is brilliant, and it is: do we need to create new KPIs for design thinking? I had never thought about that before. Are there KPIs?
Hervé?
No. No. Listen, it's simple. I mean, when you get started, what is it that you do? You start to understand and speak the language of your stakeholders, because you're not talking about their requirement, you're talking about the most important problem they go through. And that's what connects people together. You're not seen as someone, for instance, who work in marketing because you use the marketing speak, or in purchasing because you can say the word tragic and spell it right. I can't, by the way. But end of the day, people see you as being, in the same boat, because you understand their problem and you can articulate things around their problem. Buyers, the whole story about having this kind of bottleneck supplier that's really annoying them at night. That's the kind of problem where a buyer sees this talking with another buyer. And as soon as we understand problem, we speak the true language. And then we're much closer. So you don't have to justify your existence to the stakeholder, because you've brought them speed, closeness, and answers to their strategic problems. And as part of this, if you look at 10 prototypes instead of 2, you're kind of likely to get a cost out of the game. So there's no reason to recreate KPIs.
Now that is a brilliant answer. I was not expecting that. I was expecting brilliance, excuse me, but I didn't expect to understand it that well. So I think this is absolutely spot on. And so what advice do you have for picking a first project to apply design thinking, and what should we hope to learn from it? I love that.
I'll start, and I would say, I think it needs to be high profile enough so it's meaningful, right? So that there's really a attention on it, right? There's a little bit of risk with that, but this is about risk, right? And we talked about failure, right? Nobody wants to fail, right? And you hear about fail fast and get up. Nobody wants to fail. Nobody goes to bed in the morning and says, I can't wait to fail today, right? So pick something, it's more about experimenting, but pick something that's high profile enough that it's gonna make a difference. Again, I'll go back to pick a audience or stakeholder end users that are receptive to the process, not somebody that's going to battle it, right? You don't want it to be a complete layup, but you want it to be at least a path of that doesn't have too much resistance on it. And then, just really again, drive for something that's going to have visibility, I think is the third thing I'd say, where people are going to be made aware of it when the success happens. Anything to add to that, Hervé?
Things I've seen, for instance, a CPO I know well, who's retired now, but what he did one year, he went to R&D. He said, give me that list of 50 projects you've not done because you didn't have enough resources this year. And I'll go out and see if we can get suppliers to do them from A to Z.
Wow.
He got a list of, 15, 20 great stuff that he could actually purely get done outside.
Now
Another way is really to simply key account manage your key decision makers. Go and see them, tell them you're here to listen. It's not about a single project, and tell me about your frustration, things, biggest issues, biggest problem, biggest project that's on your plate for the next year, 2 years. And then pick a few. They should be daring enough and they should bring enough value to get you started.
I like that. So, Greg and Hervé, I understand that we should put a lot of seeds in the ground, quote unquote, but how do you figure out where to begin? Or do we create a short list of ideas?
Hervé.
We start from the problems, sharing the problem. This is the suppliers who can come with the short list of ideas. So, and the challenge is the sales guy, okay? The technical guys, they love it. Oh yeah, we're gonna be invited and we can show 3 different ways of doing it. This is really activating their brain. You give them a problem, and an engineer, for instance, or the designer of a service, when you give them problem and say, show me 3 different ways, you put them into a mindset that get them excited. They want to work on that problem. If they get a long list of requirements with so many pages, with intermediaries telling them that's important, not important, they get annoyed. So, just go, these are the people that will help. Sometimes, the people on the sales side can be a bit scared to see this kind of opening up. That's a bit unusual to them. But they will provide options.
I like that. Someone just wrote in, they said, great startup message, asking how can I help? Just something so basic is such a nice way to put it out there. So gentlemen, we are out of time for this session, but people, if you go into, on your left-hand side of your grip screen, if you go into the delegates, you can find both of these gentlemen. You can click that you're interested. This is not a dating service. This is interested in getting to know you or to talk to you. And then the other person can respond and you can have a meeting right on the platform or set it up for after the summit is done. So Greg and Hervé, are you open to some meetings if people would like to chat with you further?
Absolutely.
With great pleasure. Bring me your problems.
I like that.
What you ask for.
I do want to just thank Denali WNS for this amazing, wonderful sweatshirt. Oh, I don't even know if you can see it with all of the screens. Anyways, incredible. I love procurement, and I'm going to wear that proudly everywhere I go because I do love procurement. And I want to thank you guys for this awesome sweatshirt that you sent.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.